Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Beckham. The object of the exercise here is to put right one or two errors, some forced, some unenforced. Now that's pretty typical with many photographers. We try our best to get everything right in the camera, but sometimes things just get away from us that little bit. Sometimes the degree of difficulty between shooting animals in captivity or in the wild can be somewhat similar. Okay, I guess I'm stretching the point just a little bit with a tiger, given their rarity in the wild. I suppose what I mean is that in captivity we still have issues to overcome. There's the technical issues with the camera, that's one problem. And in this shot, the photographer was shooting with a Canon 5D, 1/160th of a second shutter speed at f5.6, and the ISO was 400. The lens focal length was 375mm, so the author did pretty well for sharpness from a camera shake point of view. Now, as we view this image in Adobe Camera Raw, we can see that the depth of field here is a little too shallow. And that means that the eyes, while they're just about acceptably sharp, they're certainly not critically sharp. It's the nose and mouth that are the sharpest parts of the tiger's face. Now, the author here could have done with a slightly smaller aperture. Perhaps f8 may have increased the depth of field just enough to bring those eyes into critical sharpness. But of course the better approach was a little more care to focus right on those eyes in the first place. Now we can see here that the colour, clarity and contrast is lacking, which does affect the impact of the shot. The author was also shooting through glass, which doesn't always help, but of course we're glad it's there, aren't we? Then of course we have that ugly green ball, which I guess was a plaything for the tiger. We are generally very limited in our shooting positions whenever we shoot animals in captivity. So the author really didn't have a great deal of choice here. Having said all that, this shot does have enough going for it to spend some time fixing the problems. We need to enhance what's good about the image and subdue or fix what isn't so good. Nothing is very difficult, so let's make a start. Beginning in Adobe Camera Raw, I'm going to go straight to my optics. I'm going to tick the box to remove chromatic aberration. I've had a look at the image and there doesn't seem to be a great deal of it, but just in case I've missed any, it doesn't hurt to tick the box anyway. We can use the profile corrections, but here it doesn't make a great deal of difference, and I think I prefer it with it unticked. So I'm going to move on to my basic tab here, and the first thing I want to look at here is the color balance. So I'm going to pick up the white balance tool. If we look very critically at this image, and I appreciate we're all going to be looking at a slightly different monitor, but I can see a slight cool colour, maybe even a hint of green. So I'm looking for a neutral colour somewhere maybe in the fur, and I'm going to give it a click, and it does quite a good job on the colour balance. Now the whites look white to me, and it's made the warmer tones of the fur look better as well. Looking up at the top right at the histogram, it looks fairly healthy. I think I'll just drop the exposure just a tiny amount just to put a little more impact in there. Maybe I'll drop the highlights just a bit too. But maybe I'll bring the whites up just to give a bit of sparkle. Maybe a little bit down on the blacks. We don't need a great deal here. And even a little bit of clarity too. And I think with a bit more colour, we're all going to choose something different, I think that's pretty good for the actual face of the tiger. Now, just before I move on and take a look at improving the colour and the lightness of the eyes, they do look rather dull. I think it may be worthwhile taking a look at the noise in the background, given that this was shot at 400 ISO. So I'm just going to touch my Z key to bring my zoom back and click and drag. It's not too bad at all, but I think what we'll do is just go to the Detail tab down at the bottom right here now. And I'm going to put a bit of noise reduction in, probably about 20-25. I don't want to take all of the noise away. I think that's a mistake. It makes the images look a little bit cartoon-like at times. So somewhere around 20, maybe a little above, that looks pretty good. Control 0 will fit the image back on screen. What I'd like to do next is to adjust the colour of the eyes and maybe lift the tone as well. We're going to sharpen the eyes, but I'm going to do that using a technique in Photoshop. But we can use Camera Raw to improve the colour and also the density of them. I also want to crop the image, but I'm not going to crop it in Adobe Camera Raw, because if I select my crop tool, what I want to do here is to make a square shot of the tiger. But I also want to rotate the actual crop so that I increase the tilt of the eyes of the animal. But when I do that, of course, within Camera Raw, we cannot crop outside of the picture space. So now we've got an image where the subject is too tightly cropped within the frame. If I hit the Escape key and Control 0, we can fit that back on screen. If we leave our cropping until we get the image opened into Photoshop, we can crop outside of the picture space, and then we can rotate and leave a bit of space around the animal. It's going to give us some corners to fix, but that's not going to be a difficult job. So what we need to do here is to concentrate just on those eyes. So with the zoom tool here, I'm going to click and drag to get the eyes large on screen. I'll touch the space bar and get them nicely centered. And it's when we get the image this size, you can see exactly what I mean about critical sharpness. It's just about there, but it could be better. So to have a go at the eyes, I'm going to select my adjustment brush from the toolbar on the right. And I'm just going to click into one of the eyes and you'll see the pin appear. Now I'm going to just do a little bit of brushing over the eye here, just around the edge. Just a little bit. Because then I want to go over to the right hand side and adjust the colour and also the density. So let's push up the exposure a little bit. Now you can see the eye is quite bright. Once I can see it, I want to do the masking so I know the masking is complete all the way around. And I'll take the trouble to do the other one as well. Because if there's one thing we must make sure we do, is whatever change we make to one eye, it has to be identical in the other. So we can decide now how light those eyes need to be. And sometimes it's difficult to see when we've got the image enlarged like this, but we'll zoom out and take a look in a moment. But what I'd also like to do is to see what I can do with the colour. I may take a look at that first with the temperature and tint here. I'm going to begin by just dropping down the tint towards green a little bit. I think the changes here are going to have to be fairly delicate. Maybe I'll just take the yellow a little bit towards blue, but I'll experiment by moving a little bit to the right. Here I don't like the colour. We're going more to an orange colour. So I think it looks a little bit better back there. And maybe if we scroll down a little bit, we can just improve the saturation. But we're never entirely sure how that's going to look until we hit that Control 0, fit the image on screen and take a look at that. And what I'll also do is remove the overlay there. Now we can evaluate if we've got those eyes right, but I'm reasonably happy with them as they are. But you do have a number of colour controls here to make various adjustments. But what I'd like to do next is to open this image up as a smart object in Photoshop. I've got my smart object status turned on. We can do that from the hyperlink at the bottom centre of the screen. There's the option that we require. So I'm going to go down to the bottom right of the screen and open up my tiger into Photoshop. Then we can consider that crop. Now, as soon as the image is open on screen, I've saved it as a Photoshop document. There's the little symbol that tells us we're working on a smart object. So at any time I can double click this thumbnail, it'll open back up into Camera Raw. If I wanted to make a change I could, and I can apply that by just clicking OK. But what we want to do here is to crop and rotate the image. So I'm going to select my crop tool, just making sure there's no options at the top of the screen that I want to clear. What I want to do is to drag in the left hand side, but before I start to make my final decisions, I want to click outside of the bounding box and rotate the image. I want the eyes to be fairly slanting in the picture, but now of course you can see a similar thing has happened to what we saw in Camera Raw. The difference here is what we can do is we can now open up that a little bit and move it around to get the eyes nice. I'll have my face a little bit off center, so it's just a little bit over to the right hand side. It's not an absolute square shape that I've got here, but I've got a repair to do here, and one there of course, and one bottom left. None of them are going to be that difficult, and of course the ball. Let's see if we can make life a little bit easier for ourselves. If we made the image or the crop a little bit smaller, how is that going to look? I don't think that's going to look too bad, you know, but I still feel I want to move the animal just a little bit to the right, something like that. So I'm going to have a go at that. I'm going to hit the tick on the options bar to commit that crop. Then I'll hit Control 0. Now, one of the things I want to, or one of the tools I want to use to fix those corners and the problem with that green ball is content aware fill. I cannot use that on a smart object. So what I tend to do myself, there's lots of ways we can do this, but I'll just make a copy of this with Control J, and then I'll go just to the right click and rasterize that layer. But at this stage, then I would be saving my file again. I've already saved it, calling it Tiger 1. Well, I'd call it Tiger 2 now. I'm going to make a start with probably the most difficult part, which is the green ball, but I think it's going to deal with that pretty well. I'm going to pick up, I think I'll pick up my polygonal lasso, and I just want to make a quick lasso shape around the ball and back up. Go to the edit menu and choose content aware fill. We've got the opportunity to use an automatic setting or a manual setting. Now, the last time I used this tool, I used the automatic setting, which you can see over here. If we use a custom setting, then we can decide where we're going to take the pixels from to fix the image on the right. The left is from, the right is to, so I could paint on here and determine where the repair is going to come from. But I'm going to remove that because quite often auto works better than anything I can do manually. And as you can see here, we seem to get a very acceptable result. Now, when we go down to the bottom right and click OK, it does output this to the current layer, a new layer, or a duplicate layer. Well, I'm reasonably happy with the repair that it's done. I don't think I need to do anything more. So I'm going to say on this occasion, just take it back to the current layer. I'm going to click OK to that. Control D will remove that selection, and we've got a pretty good repair on the left hand side. Now all I need to do is exactly the same for the top left corner, top right and bottom. But to keep the pressure off my computer, I won't do them all in one go. I'll do them one at a time. Let's have a go at that little bit of metalwork up there. This shouldn't be too much of a problem for content aware. Edit, content aware fill. There, it's done a grand job. So I'll do exactly the same as I did before and click OK. And it's going to fix that perfectly for us. So I'm going to carry on and use exactly the same technique for the top right corner and the bottom left corner. Content aware fill will fill those two without any difficulty at all. Now we can turn our attention to those eyes. The way I want to deal with those is one at a time, but I want to zoom in very close because I want to make a selection around the eye, and I'm going to make the selection manually. The tool I'm going to use is the polygonal lasso tool. Although this makes a selection in straight lines, if we take short steps, I feel that this often gives me greater control than the freehand lasso. So I want to go around the actual eye itself. So this is where we need to just be a little bit careful. As you can see, short steps. There's always a tendency for me to rush these things a little bit because I'm making a video and I'm conscious of the video time. Because the one thing I don't want to do is to bore people to death watching things they've already seen done a dozen times before. But I'll just do one of these so you can see it in real time, just in case you think making a selection like this is quite arduous. As you can see there, it isn't. I'm going to soften the edge of this a little, which is sounding a bit odd considering I'm going to use that selection to sharpen up the edge. But we can't have it too sharp as it may look a little unnatural. So select and mask is the option I want. And in the feather, I want to select 0.5 pixels. I want to output to a selection. OK. Now, what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to hide the selection. Control H will hide a selection. Control H will bring it back. So if we hide it, what we're going to do is we're going to clone from just this side of the selection and we're going to sharpen that edge up. And when I've gone all the way around, then I'm going to inverse my selection and do the outer edge. Let's take a look. I'll hit Control H to remove that selection. Pick up my clone tool. I want to get the brush fairly small. In fact, I just want to get a feel for where that line is. To be honest, because we're so greatly enlarged, on this particular occasion I might actually suggest we leave the line in place. Holding the Alt key, clicking to sample. Looking up at the top of the screen, I've got my opacity set to 100 and my flow to 100. You can see where I'm cloning from. So from time to time, I need to change my clone source. But what I'm going to do is clone all the way around the edge. Now you're not seeing a great deal of difference here. So let me hit Control H and see if I can show you what we're actually doing, because we are having a difference here. See how it's sharpening up that edge. So I think you get the idea. Change your sampling point quite often and work around the edge and sharpen it up. Now we won't see the full effect of this until we go back and do the other way. But I'm going to carry on all the way around and I'll be back in almost no time. So with the spinning round of the screen, I continued to sharpen up that selection on the inside, but I've zoomed out because what we need to do now is inverse the selection, so the selection selects everything but the eye, so I can do the other side. So if we go to our select menu, there's the option we want, Shift Control I, and you see a bounding box around the outer edge. Now, once again, I'm going to go in really tight. Now I need to do the other side. So same tool, I'll make the brush just a little bigger, click outside, and I'm just going to sharpen that up a little bit. And once again, you can't see what I'm actually doing here, so I'm going to try to do this with Control H. And if you see there's a little bit of a problem anywhere, you can always go back and deal with that. But sample, paint, sample, paint. Just keep changing your sample point and sharpen up the outer edge. I could go a little bit bigger with this image, to be honest. And there you can see it. Now you would think that what we're doing here is not a massive amount. I made a little bit of a mistake there. Control Z. Just, you can always touch in these things. But there we have virtually one eye done, and I do emphasize that I am conscious of the time here, so I'm rushing a little bit. You will take a bit more time than I probably have here and get a slightly better result. But once we zoom out here, the eye is going to look better, and we still haven't done the pupil. So what I would do from here is exactly the same with the right eye. Now, as you can see here, I've gone ahead and sharpened up the edge of the right eye in exactly the same way as I did the left. But I've also gone ahead and done a little bit of work on the black centre of the eye. Pretty quick and easy to do. If we go down to the bottom right of the layers, we can create a new blank layer. You can see I've just called that black centre on the top right. Then if we select black as our foreground colour and a soft edge brush, and from the options at the top of the screen, I've got 100% opacity, but a very low 1 to 3% in the flow. Then all I've done is zoom into the eye and just painted a little bit of blackness there. If I turn off both of these, you can see what I've actually done looks completely insignificant when we see it like that, but it just makes that difference. Control 0. Now I've been saving my work regularly, so I think I'm happy now to go to the top right of my layers and I'll flatten this image. The only thing I need to do is some vignetting around the outer edge to force our attention onto the face of the tiger. I'm going to start though with those two little black marks with the spot healing brush. I think they should do them. Just distracting a little bit. And for the edges, I may even just use my burn tool. Now the burn tool we'll find in the toolbox. It's grouped with the sponge and the dodge. I'm going to choose burn. Again, I've got a standard soft edge brush. Mid-tone selected, and the exposure, that may be a bit high, so I'm going to touch the 1 key to take that down to 10%. Because I want to do a bit of work on these highlights, well not highlights, but certainly they need to be taken down around the edge, especially that green leaf over there. The bottom left corner and the base to make sure our attention is thrown up into the tiger's face, which is the strongest part. Now how much of this burning we want to do, as I always say, is going to be a personal choice. Sometimes we can choose to do some of this on the face as well. And what I have often done in the past with big cats is I've switched to the dodge tool. And with highlights set and the exposure, probably that may even be a little bit strong. So we could even take it down to, well, let me choose about 5%. Difficult to get it bang on. There we are, 5%. What I was about to say is sometimes it's not a bad idea to just lift the tones of the fur around the eye, because that's the most important part of the picture, and it's why we need to be very careful with the sharpness, of course. All these are little tiny touches which we're all going to choose something slightly different. I may even do the similar thing on the teeth on the front, just to give a bit more light to them, because they are pretty prominent and an important part of the tiger's character. And of course you could always do some colour work. Let's turn back to the same group of tools, but this time pick up the sponge tool. Again, a nice big brush. Looking up at the top of the screen, we can see saturate is set, the flow is 10%. So if I wanted to put a little bit more colour around the tongue and the nose and maybe the muzzle of the animal and around the cheeks where we're trying to attract attention, well, I think you probably get the idea. And of course, the good thing about the sponge is we can desaturate. So if we've got strong colours like this green here, we could eradicate that because it will be a bit distracting on the edge. So here's the image we began with. It needed just a little bit of colour, contrast and clarity. But we needed to work a little bit more on the eyes to sharpen them up just a little bit. Here we have the final image, and I think it's well worth the time we put into it. It's possible it could be cropped down into a tighter square, but I think that's more likely to be personal preference. I'll see you next time.